A seminal moment in the American justice system.
The step we take today is just that, a step. But it is a big step, and I can assure you that the women and men of the Department of Justice will not stop until justice is won.
I'm Mollie Halpern. On October 7th, 2020, after more than 8 years of work, the U.S. government announced the indictments of Alexander Ayman Cote and Al-Shafi al-Sheikh. The former British citizens were radicalized in London and became fighters for the barbaric foreign terrorist organization Islamic State of Iraq and al-Sham, better known as ISIS. According to the indictment, from 2012 to 2015, Cote and al-Sheikh were leading participants of a brutal hostage-taking scheme that resulted in the deaths of 4 Americans in Syria. They also allegedly engaged in a prolonged pattern of physical and psychological violence against their hostages, who gave them a nickname. Cote and al-Sheikh, along with Mohammed Emwazi and an unidentified person referred to as Co-Conspirator 1 or CC1, were called the Beatles, a reference to their British accents. Assistant Attorney General John Demers.
Today is a good day, but it is also a solemn one. Today, we remember the 4 innocent Americans whose lives were taken by ISIS. James Wright Foley, Stephen Joel Sutloff, Peter Edward Kasich, and Kayla Jean Mueller.
Diane Foley is James's mother, who affectionately calls her firstborn son Jimmy.
He was a talented young man who had a huge commitment to press freedom and the voices of the vulnerable. And in many ways, he, along with several of the others who were killed, Stephen Sotloff, Kayla Mueller, Peter Kasich, Luke Summers, Warren Weinstein, a lot of these people who died that year were, in my opinion, some of the best of America. Not the famous, not the celebrities, but good, hard-working Americans who dare to go out in the world and do some good, do what they think is right.
James was a former elementary school teacher turned conflict journalist who was covering the Syrian civil war when Cote, al-Sheikh, and other ISIS fighters kidnapped him and his friend, a British photojournalist, on Thanksgiving Day in 2012. James was the first of the Americans to die. His death horrified people around the world after ISIS's media center, Al-Furqan, disseminated a video titled "A Message to America" in August of 2014. In it, viewers can see James dressed in a bright orange jumpsuit, kneeling in a desert with his arms behind him. His brown hair had been shaved, and he faced the camera. The video showed his brutal beheading. At the end of the sword, wearing a black mask, was one of his captors, Mohammed Emwazi, one of the Beatles known as Jihadi John. The end of the video depicted Jihadi John threatening the life of fellow journalist Stephen Sotloff, who had been forced to his knees. It was his grandparents, Holocaust survivors, who inspired Stephen to, quote, give a voice to people who didn't have one. Stephen was reporting on the refugee crisis in Syria when ISIS fighters forcibly seized and detained him. In early September 2014, ISIS's Al-Furqan released a second message to America. The video showed that Jihadi John had carried out his threat and executed Stephen in the same way as James. Kayla Mueller's faith called her to serve the vulnerable at home in America and around the globe. She was a source of comfort and hope to refugees in Syria. While there in August of 2013, ISIS fighters forcibly seized and detained the humanitarian aid worker and human rights activist. The self-proclaimed leader of ISIS, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, forced Kayla to have sex with him while she was held captive. In 2015, Kayla's family learned of her death from an email that ISIS fighters had sent them. Humanitarian Peter Kasich founded an organization to deliver food and medical aid to refugees. The former airborne ranger in the U.S. Army was working for his organization in Syria when, in October of 2013, ISIS kidnapped him. Just about a year later, ISIS released a video showing the decapitated head of Kasich. In this 4-part podcast miniseries entitled An American Mission Mapping the Way to Making Hostage Policy a Top Priority, hear how the victims' families' advocacy and relentless pursuit of justice for their children's deaths helped spark U.S. hostage policy and organizational changes.
I was angry, Molly, and I was determined that Jim's legacy had to be that our country would do better, would prioritize American hostages and protect journalists. I also felt challenged by Jim that we have to do better.
Diane rose to James's challenge and continues to do so. During what is the 5th year anniversary of the reforms, she, other hostage families, and government officials say the hostage enterprise must evolve as America faces a future with an administration change. Hear from former U.S. Department of State, FBI, and National Security Council members who were intimately involved in the genesis of hostage policy reforms.
It was intense.
Learn about the growing pains and accomplishments from those charged with carrying out the revised policy.
I realized on day one how crucial it was that we work counterterrorism policy issues and always aggressively focused on recovery of the hostages.
But first, more on what has been a long time coming: the indictments of specially designated global terrorists Kotay and al-Sheikh. According to a U.S. Department of Justice press release, the indictments against the two Beatles are the result of more than 8 years of efforts by the FBI, other U.S. government employees, and the international law enforcement community. To help prosecute the men, the U.S. government first requested evidence from Britain back in 2015. The U.K. balked at the idea because of the possibility that the U.S. could seek the death penalty. Adding another layer of complication, al-Sheikh's mother filed a lawsuit in the UK to challenge the transfer of evidence for putting her son on trial in the United States. American-backed Syrian Democratic Forces captured Kotay and al-Sheikh in Syria in January of 2018 as the terrorists tried to escape to Turkey. Under the law of armed conflict, the U.S. military held them in Iraq. Attorney General William Barr eventually assured the British government that the U.S. would waive the death penalty in order to get their cooperation and the evidence needed to litigate the case in U.S. courts. Then, this past September, the British court cleared the way for the UK to share its evidence with the U.S. A month later, the terrorists were brought to American soil. Zachary Terwilliger, the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, lists the men's alleged offenses in the 8-count criminal indictment.
Conspiracy to commit hostage-taking resulting in death. Hostage-taking resulting in death.
That's 1 count for each James, Kayla, Stephen, and Peter.
Count 6, conspiracy to murder United States citizens outside of the United States. Count 7, conspiracy to provide material support to terrorists in the form of hostage-taking resulting in death and murder. Count 8, conspiracy to provide material support to a terrorist organization.
It's a speaking indictment detailing extremely violent acts Kotay, al-Sheikh, Mwazi, and other foreign terrorist organization fighters allegedly inflicted against the 4 American hostages, as well as British, European, and Japanese nationals in Syria. These cruel acts included shocks to the torso and extremities with an electric taser, waterboarding, beatings with punches or sticks lasting up to 20 minutes per hostage, forcing them to stand for an entire day and night, sometimes for several days at a time, depriving them of food and access to the bathroom. If convicted, the defendants face a maximum penalty of life in prison for each count of conviction.
I think we decided that if we were going to do this case, we were going to tell the fullest story we could of what these defendants did, and we were going to put on the strongest case possible. And with the British evidence, I think we can do that very well.
The victims and their families in this case are what's driving our pursuit of justice. That's who we represent, the people of the United States. So I look forward to a close relationship with the families as this process moves forward.
Diane Foley told me that it's miraculous for her to see the men finally brought to U.S. soil to face the justice system. She went on to say that she wants them to undergo a fair trial, a process her son James and the other victims were denied. She and the other 3 families issued a joint statement. Here's an excerpt. "We are hopeful that the U.S. government will finally be able to send the important message that if you harm Americans, you will never escape justice. And when you are caught, you will face the full power of American law." Jihadi John and al-Baghdadi experienced American justice, not through the court system, but by the U.S. military. Jihadi John was killed in a drone strike in Syria in November 2015, and al-Baghdadi died during a military operation in Syria in October of 2019.
As President Trump shared during his 2020 State of the Union address, the American warriors who conducted the military operation that resulted in the death of ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi were so inspired by Kayla that they named the mission Task Force 814, a reference to August 14th, Kayla's birthday.
CC1 is currently imprisoned in Turkey, where he was captured, tried, and convicted of a terrorism-related offense. Since the indictment was unsealed, Kotay and Al-Sheikh have made their initial appearances in a Virginia court where they entered not guilty pleas. They requested a trial by jury, which is scheduled to begin in January. These indictments raise multiple questions, namely, why did it take the deaths of 4 Americans for the U.S. government to change its hostage policy?
Really horrified when Jim was killed. Totally caught me unaware. We were clueless, Molly. And I really was angry, mostly with our government, primarily because I felt lied to. I was so angry that I'd been lied to.
The threats the Foleys received, not from foreign terrorists, but the U.S. government.
Their treatment prior to the murder, and even subsequent to the murder of their children, left a lot to be desired from the U.S. government. And I think people like Diane Foley and the Muellers and the Kasichs and the Solofs, their stories were told, and when people found out about it, it was embarrassing for the U.S. government. And the U.S. government should have been embarrassed by the way that matter was handled.
The infighting, bad-mouthing, and the bureaucracy among the U.S. government interagency.
And these poor families had nowhere to go. Do I go to consular affairs? Do I go to FBI? Do I go to the embassy? It was just a very scattered process, and there was a lot of disconnecting communication with departments and agencies that are helpful, but not really working together for the same mission.
The results of the review of the hostage policy and more coming up on An American Mission, mapping the way to making hostage policy a top priority. I'm Mollie Halpern. Thanks for listening.